Good evening, my lovelies, and welcome. I'm Lady Creepypasta. This evening we have the third and final installment of The Staircase Game by author, redditor, Certain Emergency 122. Before we begin though, a quick thank you to my dark family on Patreon for your continuous support of this podcast and channel. Beautiful ghouls such as Danny White, Nicholas Corries, Dawn Fritzwater, Cyanide Jack, Melissa Perez, Honey Santiago, Oliver Dace, Karen Parrott, L. Andrew Augustus, Dana Fringer, Stephen Aguilera, Tay the Fluth, Bill Thornsley, Laura Setapenry, and all those listed in the episode description below. If you too would like to join these ghouls and support this podcast and YouTube channel, go to patreon.com/LadyMcCreepypasta for more information. But now though, my dears, it is time. So come, lean in closer, and we'll begin. Staircase 4. We braced ourselves to be attacked again. Instead, the same lovely birdsong as before greeted us. We all relax and increment, our hands no longer clutching at each other quite so tightly. I couldn't relax all the way though, because now I knew that those things above us weren't actually birds, no matter how much they pretended to be. As we neared what seemed to be the end of the stairs, my heart began pounding an impromptu drum solo. If this staircase had less than 100 steps or more, that meant we, or rather I, had chosen the wrong door. We could try to run back up the stairs if that was the case, though I didn't hold out much hope we'd make it. Going back upstairs meant breaking yet another rule of the staircase game, which in turn meant something else nasty trying to kill us. At any rate, I'd seen the other door melting, so even if we did make it back up in one piece and re-entered the labyrinth, there wouldn't be anywhere else to go to. All I could do now was fervently pray that we were on the right staircase. 98, 99, 100. We came to a halt. I craned my neck over my shoulder to see that the steps had ended. We had chosen the right door after all. Thank God. If the game rules hadn't expressly forbade talking to each other while on the stairs, I probably would have celebrated our luck by cheering loudly. As it was, I wanted to collapse in relief. Scratch that. I wanted to collapse, period. We're over halfway there, I thought, and tried to squash the hope that followed. I reminded myself that this game probably had tons more unpleasant surprises in store for us. Jonathan opened the door, and a bizarre sight greeted our eyes. We stood in a spacious room completely made of mirrors. The ceiling, the floor, the walls, every inch of it was covered with mirrors. A soft glow illuminated the room, though we couldn't see where it came from. We could, however, see the white wooden door set at the other end of the room. Like us, it produced infinite reflections. The entire room reminded me of the Infinity Mirror Rooms installation series by Kusama Yayoi. It had that same sense of space and time warping out of joint. Granted, compared to everything else we'd been through so far, walking across a room, albeit a large one covered in mirrors, was nothing. "This is too easy," I muttered. I kept staring at the door, expecting it to vanish before my eyes. It stayed stubbornly solid and annoyingly ordinary, as if someone had happened to pluck it from a house in the suburbs and deposited it here. Jonathan said, "Agreed." There was a moment where we simply stood around waiting for something terrifying to appear, but the only things that moved in the room were our own reflections. It was the first time I'd seen myself since we'd started the game, and I finally realized that we all looked, well, horrible. Itchy, flaking, dried blood covered us. Our hair and eyelashes were stiff with it. Our eyes and teeth showed very white against all that reddish-brown blood. If another human being happened to meet us right now, they'd probably run screaming in the opposite direction. I don't know why the thought struck me as so funny. Probably because one other thing after another had been chasing us nearly non-stop for the past few hours, and I was near delirious with exhaustion. Once I started laughing, I couldn't stop. Jonathan got it. "Good thing no one else we know is here right now," he said, grinning back at me. Even covered in blood, that lopsided smile of his was lovely. "My dad would probably have a heart attack." At long last, we were able to sit down and rest for a few minutes. Thanks to the sea of blood, our flashlights, phone, and portable phone chargers were completely ruined. The water bottles and canned food were all right, though the backpack they'd been carried in would never be the same again. "You'd think," I said, while trying not to gulp down the canned peaches all at once, "someone who played the game before could have warned us that the blood would ruin nearly all our supplies, including the flashlights they told us to bring. Why not tell us to bring dry bags? Better yet, why not tell us to bring weapons?" Jonathan was too busy wolfing down his own canned peaches to answer, but Margot finally spoke. "It's different for everyone." "What?" "The staircase game is different for everyone. You encounter different things and go to different places. It really depends on what you fear or what you want. The only thing that's the same across all of them is the darkness on the staircases, and what's in the darkness." We both eyed her with hard suspicion, but I was the one who asked. "How do you know that, Margot?" She heaved a deep sigh. "I talked to Faris 7921 before we came here. His real name is Lucian Hammond, and he's played the staircase game a few times now." Before I could respond, Jonathan said with an edge in his voice, "That would have been helpful to know, I don't know, at any previous point before we started playing this game." "Is there anything else you want to share?" I added. Margot shook her head and clammed up again. Frankly, it was eerie to see her so silent and downcast. She'd been able to shrug off everything else so far. Now that we were no longer running for our lives, I personally was struggling not to dwell on the shapes that had broken through the doors in the desert. Although I didn't enjoy being stuck in a constant state of fear, at least then my brain was too occupied with surviving to focus on anything else. "We should get going," said Jonathan unenthusiastically. Yeah. Neither of us made any effort to stand up. As the adrenaline receded, fatigue took its place and my eyelids seemed to weigh 100 pounds. If I could have slept here, with solid reassurance that the door wouldn't disappear on us, I would have had zero trouble passing out on the cold, hard glass. It felt as though we'd been stuck in the game for decades already. Margot stood up and started walking over to the door because, of course she did. It occurred to me then that Jonathan had been right. She was more focused on winning the game than going home. Her secrecy over what she knew about the staircase game and her behavior recently had crossed the line from stubborn straight into obsessive. She went to the door as though she didn't feel the hunger and exhaustion the rest of us felt, or even any pain from her fall down the stairs. Worried, I got up to follow her, only to see that all her reflections stood still, out of sync with her. One of them waved at me sardonically. I heard the sound of breaking glass, as if someone had accidentally dropped a stack of dishes on the floor, or shattered a mirror. Jonathan said from behind me, "Alex?" I turned around. For a full minute, I couldn't comprehend what had just happened. I looked up to Jonathan's smiling face and down to where his hand rested on my shoulder. It was the injured hand, the one he'd been cradling close to his chest while we ate our food, except it was whole and perfect again. And then I looked at the shard of glass held in that hand, roughly 6 inches long and 2 across, the shard he'd shoved all the way through my left shoulder. There was no pain. Not yet. I whispered, "Jonathan?" Some instinct made me look down at where his reflection should have been, and I saw another Jonathan staring up at us, trapped behind the glass. My Jonathan. He screamed something at me, but I couldn't hear what he said because the thick glass muffled his words. He started slamming his hands against the glass, leaving bloody smears on it as he tried to punch his way through. And then the other Jonathan pulled the shard back out of my shoulder, and that did hurt. It burned, and the pain cleared my head enough that I could think again. Blood spurted out of my wound as I pushed him away, or tried to. I couldn't move my left arm at all. It hung from my punctured shoulder, dead and useless. The other Jonathan evaded me easily and wrapped one hand into my hair so he could pull my neck back and dig the tip of the bloody shard into my throat. "Any last words?" he said mockingly. I was hoping for a snappy comeback to come to mind. The best I could do was refuse to give him the satisfaction of begging for my life. I slammed my elbow into his stomach and heard him give a small oof sound. Then I twisted around and grabbed the shard from his slackening hand. I nearly succeeded in shoving it into his throat, except by then one of my own reflections had risen out of the mirror behind me like an evil ghost. She forced my arm up and away from the other Jonathan, and then used her hold on me to throw me across the room. On one hand, she'd thrown me towards the door instead of away from it. On the other hand, I couldn't leave Jonathan behind. I scrambled to my feet, shaking my head to try and clear it of the grey spots dancing across my vision. I managed to take 2 steps towards where I could still see him trapped in the mirror, and then Margot yanked me backwards by my injured arm. Pain exploded through it, and I could barely hear her say, "Alex, we have to go!" "Jonathan is still in there," I snarled at her. "We can still save him! Get him out!" Even as I said it, though, I knew it wasn't true. More of our reflections had stepped out of the reflections of the white doors in the mirrors. 10 other Jonathans, 10 other Margos, and 10 other Alexandras stood between us and Jonathan. And more were coming. An infinite number of them pushing their way out of the mirrors as if the mirrors were made of water and not glass. Those reflections, already in the room, started running towards us, their eyes burning bright with bloodlust. Margot dragged me backwards. It's too late. We can't help Jonathan. We don't have a choice. Yes, we do, I screamed, the word so loudly that my throat ached. Let go of me! She didn't. She dragged me away from the room and through the doorway, towards the final white staircase waiting for us. I watched our reflections stop chasing us. I watched them turn towards where Jonathan was still trapped. They converged on him, dropping down to put their faces right by the glass above him. And the very last thing I saw, before they completely surrounded him and the door slammed shut, was Jonathan staring at us with agonized, despairing eyes still beating on the glass. Staircase 5. I immediately tore myself free from Margot and ran towards the door. Only rough wood met my fingertips, no doorknob. I tried to wrench it back open anyways, wrapping my fingers around the edges of the door and ignoring the sharp splinters. Right then, I didn't care about the staircase game or its dumb rules. I didn't even care about going home. What I cared about was Jonathan and the way he looked at us as we left him behind. And then, the door began melting under my hands. No, I thought. I tried to hold it in place, like I thought the door would turn solid again if I could just make it stay still. Margot touched my shoulder and I shook her off violently, unable to even look at her. Part of me knew she'd probably been right. There was no way we could have saved Jonathan, at least not without getting ourselves trapped behind the mirrors too. Yet a larger part of me seethed in rage. We could have at least tried. How could she have abandoned him like that? I don't know how long I spent in the darkness trying to get the rapidly disappearing door back open. I did everything I could think of. At one point, I ran to the other side of it and tried to open it from there, alternating between pushing and pulling. I even flung myself through it as it disappeared. That didn't work either. In the end, as the last of the door dissolved in front of my eyes, all I could do was stare at the empty space where it had been half a minute before. When Margot reached out to me, I didn't bat her hand away again. My mind was completely blank. I followed her obediently down the steps because I couldn't think of what else to do. Had I missed some obvious way to open the door? Was it completely impossible to reopen after it closed? Or had I simply not tried hard enough? Halfway down the stairs, I contemplated simply sitting down and refusing to move, yet that wouldn't bring me any closer to saving Jonathan either. Eventually, I realized that my best bet was to make it through the next door. Maybe there would be more doors on the other side of it, doors that connected back to the mirror room. So when Margot pulled open the door at the end of the staircase, I didn't try to dash back up the stairs again. I stepped through it without hesitation, and I had to shield my eyes from the warm sunlight that shone down on it, so bright it didn't seem real. As my vision adjusted, I saw that we stood in the center of a beautiful meadow, roughly the size of 2 football fields. Daffodils grew everywhere, nodding cheerfully at us, and the air smelled like spring, green and new, the scent of wet earth and growing things. It was spring here, and it would always be spring. I looked across the meadow and saw a black door. Only one and no others beside it, on the riverbank closest to us. The river looked polluted. It was black as well, and it rushed around the whole meadow in a giant loop, enclosing us. The other riverbank, way past the door, was shrouded in a grey, nearly opaque mist. I couldn't make anything out on that riverbank, except for a boat of some kind that sat at the very edge of the bank. A tiny rickety boat that bobbed up and down in the furious current, one stiff breeze away from falling apart. I took a deep breath, the better to yell at Margot, and unexpectedly, contentment stole over me. It was the kind of contentment you feel when it's a cold winter night and you're safely ensconced at home with your loved ones. You're sitting in cozy armchairs beside the fireplace, a really good book in your hands, and you can hear the wind howling and furiously yanking at your windows. Knowing that it's absolutely awful outside only makes you more grateful to be warm and safe inside. That kind of contentment. If I stayed here, I would feel that contentment forever. No more arguments, no more worries, no more fear ever again. I could let go of all my rage and self-loathing. It was incredibly tempting, and I most likely would have given in if Jonathan's face hadn't flashed across my mind right then. The peace didn't disappear entirely. It simply lessened enough for me to decide that it wasn't yet time for me to stay here. I turned to Margot, ready to shake the answers out of her if necessary. Luckily for her, I didn't have to. She saw the look on my face and said, "I can explain." I glared at her, fists clenched tightly by my side. "I'm waiting." "The staircase game gives you whatever you want. That's what Lucian told me. What he didn't tell me is that the game needs a sacrifice before it gives you anything." She took a deep breath. "I saw my sister back there, Alex. I saw her in the labyrinth. She told me that she died because of me." She started crying again. I stared at her, my anger momentarily forgotten. "That's impossible, Margot. You were 3 years old when she died." "She told me that I fell into the pool. That the reason she died was because she went in after me. She helped me get out, Alex. And then she drowned in there all by herself." I wanted to tell Margot she must have heard a lie, but actually, it had a horrible ring of truth to it. I remember the corpse telling me Margot is lying. It had been right. Unwillingly, I felt a moment's sympathy for Margot. Margot threw a pleading look at me. "The whole reason I even wanted to play this game was to bring her back. I had to keep going, don't you see?" Her confession rendered me silent for a few minutes. And then my anger roared back to life and I said, "So you decided to sacrifice one of us? How did you choose Jonathan? Or was it supposed to be me?" "No," said Margot quickly. "I would never sacrifice you." "So what? You didn't give a fuck about Jonathan?" "I chose you, Alex. I chose you and my sister." I shook my head. "No, that's not true. You chose yourself, like always." Suddenly I was close to crying myself, except my tears were born of rage. I had always known that Margot missed her sister. Just because she couldn't remember Marianne that well didn't mean she loved her any less. Yet, I never thought Jonathan and I would have to pay for the cost of that love. How could she have lied to us? How could she possibly stand there trying to justify herself as if she hadn't condemned Jonathan to being trapped in the game for the rest of his life? "Tell me how to get back into the mirror room. I can save Jonathan without your help." I waited for her to respond, only to find her staring past me. I followed her gaze to see the dead walking towards us. They came out of the river. They started out as grey figures with indistinguishable features. And then, the closer they got to us, the more clearly I could see them. Except, they stayed pale and ghostly, like they were barely there. How did I know that they were dead? Because Marianne led the pack. She could have been Margot's twin, Only the slightest of differences set them apart, as if someone had set out to create two identical figurines, and his hand had slipped at the last second. They had the same build, the same heart-shaped face, and the same eyes, except Marianne was taller and her hair wavy instead of straight. She was inexplicably older too. Our age maybe, or the age she would have been if she'd lived. Margot ran to her. It was my turn to grab for her, to hold her still. She slipped through my grasp like water. I ran after her even though a tiny voice inside my head screamed at me to get out, to leave before it was too late. Even though I was still angry at Margot, angry enough that I never wanted to see her again, I knew somehow that if I left her to the dead, they would do something unspeakable to her. And maybe she'd deserve it, but I didn't want to be the one to decide that. The dead stopped moving. They waited for us to come to them, their eyes as dull and dusty as marbles. Margot finally slowed down when she reached Marianne. She stopped beside Marianne as if she couldn't believe her sister was finally here. I stopped as well, still a good distance back from them. "Margot!" I called. "Get away from them!" It was like she couldn't hear me. Or maybe she simply didn't want to. She threw her arms around Marianne and hugged her tightly. Marianne didn't return the embrace. She was as lifeless and unmoving as a doll. "Let's go, Marianne," Margot said. "Let's get out of here." She tugged at her sister, and Marianne actually walked forward a couple of steps before stopping. Margot dropped her sister's hand as if it had burned her. "I can't leave," said Marianne. Her voice was the eerie sound of branches scratching at your window late at night. Nothing human. "Stay with us." I knew with instant clarity how the staircase game had interpreted Margot's wish. She'd probably thought, "I want to see my sister again," and the game was fulfilling exactly that wish. Nothing more and nothing less. I also knew Margot well enough to predict her response. I screamed at her anyway, even though it wouldn't make a difference. "Don't, Margot, don't!" Margot didn't even spare me a glance. Instead, she kept staring at her sister, the agony plain on her face. She couldn't go back. She'd lied to herself every step of the way here, telling herself that her friends didn't need to know why she wanted to win the game, or even what she would get if she won. She told herself that the game wouldn't affect us, and then when she found out that it did, and in the worst way possible, she tried to justify it with simple math. One life was going in, and one was going back out. It wasn't really wrong to do this. If she went back home empty-handed, with Marianne still rotting in her grave and Jonathan worse than dead, that was as much as admitting that she'd made a mistake. That she'd majorly fucked up, and Margot never, ever made mistakes. Margot licked her lips nervously and gave a single nod. And the dead tore her apart. They reached out with terribly strong hands, and they tore off her limbs, her head, and they dug their hands into all that meat. They ripped her open the way you tear apart the wrapping paper of your Christmas present. She didn't even have time to scream. They sprayed her blood and strayed her teeth into the air, and then they scooped up handfuls of viscera and stuffed it into their mouths, smacking their lips in enjoyment. It was like watching a swarm of beetles and maggots and rats devouring a dead deer. They ate like they'd been starving for 100 years, 1,000. As they ate her, the color returned to their faces and bodies. They looked alive again. And then one of them looked up to see me still standing there, frozen by sheer horror. They all turned as one to stare at me, like the many heads of one creature, with drooling jaws and vacant eyes. I took that as a sign to start running. I sprinted past them towards the door on the riverbank. To keep exhaustion at bay, I made myself think about what I'd just seen, the red ruin that Margot had become in a matter of seconds, and I told myself that I couldn't die like that. I ran without having any idea if they were still eating her or if they'd started running after me. I couldn't hear anything over the sound of my own breathing. The black wooden door grew closer and closer until it loomed over me, impossibly tall. I could hear them now, their feet slapping down on the ground as they tried to reach me before I escaped. I imagined their hands grasping for any part of me, my hair or my clothes or my useless left arm. I opened the door and tumbled through without really seeing what was on the other side. Immediately, I scrambled up to check whether any of them had followed me through the open door, their hands outstretched into claws and their red mouths gaping. There was nothing there. No door, just an empty street. An ordinary, empty street I had walked along many times before, on my way to school or Margot's house. Everywhere I turned, I saw normal shops, normal houses and apartments, normal cars and bikes. Normal people going about their everyday lives, laughing or talking loudly. There wasn't a single staircase in sight. I survived the staircase game. Any sane person would be grateful to simply still be alive, and I am grateful, I am. When we first started the game, we'd been so sure of ourselves, so certain that the game would turn out to be either a hoax or completely harmless. We thought we were invincible. We were wrong. No time had passed at all since we'd first entered the game and I came back out, the only survivor. I didn't bother attending my college orientation or any of the classes I'd signed up for a month ago. Instead, I focused on trying to learn more about the staircase game. Yet, no matter how hard or often I scoured the internet and the various paranormal discussion forums, I only ever got the same posts I'd already reread 100 times. At one point, I became so frustrated that I reached out to Lucian Pharos 7921, even though I suspected he'd been the one to dangle Marianne in front of Margot like a carrot. I responded to all his old posts, sent countless private messages to him, all with no response. Either he's ignoring me, or he's somewhere where there's no phone service and no Wi-Fi. I wonder if he's playing the game again, and if so, who he's playing it with. The truth is, guilt and self-loathing eat at me every day. And every hour, every minute, and every second of every day. Each night I go to sleep, I'm back in the game watching Jonathan scream at me from behind the mirrors or Margot torn apart. I keep wondering why I was the one who survived. I replay everything that happened during the game over and over again, analyzing each moment to see if I could have done something, anything differently. If there was really any logic to the way the world worked, then I should have been the one who lost the game, not Jonathan and Margot. Was it really through pure chance, pure luck, that I survived? Which brings me to today. I woke up this morning realizing that there's only one thing left to do. I have to play the staircase game again. You probably think I'm crazy, but I want to. No, need to rescue Jonathan. In my dreams, his reflections are hunting him down as he wanders through the cold and colorless world behind the mirrors. I need him to know that despite what it looked like, I didn't give up on him. I haven't given up on him. Don't get me wrong, I'm not going to sacrifice anyone for Jonathan, no matter how much I love him. Unlike Margot, I'm not selfish enough to think that trading one person's life for another is a fair trade. And even if I did, I wouldn't lie to myself. I wouldn't pretend that what I was doing was the right thing, or that I had no choice about doing it. That's why I wrote this post. If you've read all of this and believe me, then you know everything that I do about this game. I'm searching for someone who understands the risks. Someone who's brave enough and curious enough to play anyways. Maybe someone who's so unhappy here that they'd jump at the chance to explore another world. Or someone who wants to study the game, run experiments on it, and make new scientific discoveries. Or maybe someone who's survived similar supernatural games before. Someone who's always believed in the paranormal and who knows how dangerous a simple game can be. If that sounds like you, please reach out to me. You and I can play the staircase game together. Thank you for joining me this evening, my dears. If you've just stumbled upon my realm, welcome, my lovelies. Do remember to hit that subscribe button and additionally hit that bell icon as well if you're listening on YouTube to be notified of new uploads. If you would like to submit a story for consideration, send it to me at lady.mccreepster@gmail.com. That is all the time we have this evening, my dears. Till next time, sweet dreams.